and today we've got Steve Erdall and Pete Daykin joining us from Wordnerds. Big hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
And as we can see, you were at the top of Wordnerds Tower there.
We are, yeah. We've just had to move the laptop because we were pointing outside, so it made us look very dark. So we're now facing the corner of the room.
I'm loving the full,
absolutely beautiful.
The full multinational view. You know, you've got to not just be like, in a big building. You've got to have like the penthouse suite. And
we have clouds. We're looking down on Newcastle, which, as a Sunderland fan, is something that I like to spend most of my time doing. It's a wonderful day.
Well, I mean, at least at the moment, of course, we've changed ownership, though, haven't we? So goodness knows what's going to happen next with that.
Oh, good. Another opportunity to talk about Newcastle and Sunderland football.
We'll move straight on then, shall we? Because there's no rugby involvement in that. So it's super nice to have you guys sort of come and join us here today. Because we've known each other for a little while now, but I think that we've never really had the opportunity to talk like this, like on camera kind of thing. So I'm pleased we're all looking our glorious best, basically.
I think the vast majority of our conversations, Victoria, could not possibly have been broadcast under any medium whatsoever. So it's lovely to sit down and do this. It's really great to see the building here.
And probably the first time without alcohol. I mean, let's be honest here, unless there's wine in the teacups, which we all perfected over locked-in. So there we go. So it's brilliant to have you here today. And I thought what would be really nice is because obviously I know a bit about your journey, but it has been pretty stratospheric. And it's been really exciting from really small acorns, a little tiny idea. Like you're now running this huge software company right in the middle of Newcastle. And I think people will be really interested about that journey. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what that's been like and where you've started and like how you've got to where you are today?
Shall I go first? Yeah, well, I think Pete and I have got quite different backgrounds, and I'll tell you about mine, and then Pete can fill in his. And our paths kind of crossed because I was, I'm a recovering linguist. So the stuff we're doing now on tweets and reviews and sales data, marketing data, I was previously doing on Victorian ghost stories and Scottish mythology, and you can imagine how much fun I was at parties. But I kind of felt like there was something more that could be done with this, certainly around business communications, and certainly understanding what people think. And I took this to. I sort of started out looking at universities, looking at their prospectuses and that kind of thing, because it was a sort of world I knew. And I was putting those prospectuses through the same process that I was putting, M.R. James ghost stories through, just as a bit of a nerdy sort of hobby in the first instance. I know, right? It's, just a glass of wine and a bunch of university marketing data. It just, the long winter evenings flew by. And then I didn't quite know what to do next. That sort of got me to the point where I was able to leave the uni and go out on my own and kind of become essentially a sort of freelance linguist. Didn't really know what to do next. And so a kind of mutual friend introduced me to Pete, who at the time was running a digital agency. He'll tell you more about that. But he was kind of, it was a really interesting conversation I had with him about the potential of this, and he saw it kind of straight away, but there was no kind of logical place to kind of put that idea at that point. And then I was kind of sharing an office with a couple of people who might be aware of Victoria, including some organizations that got on to amazing things. But one of those people was the partner of the mutual friend that put us in touch. And she got a phone call just at the end of a working day at like 5 o'clock. I was just about to leave the shared office. And she went, "It's for you." And handed me the phone, and it was Pete. And Pete had just been at the first day of a 2-day hack at Nissan. And they had this problem that Pete sort of thought there might be a kind of linguistic way of approaching this problem. And the problem was, how do you go about finding the people who've got a problem with a new car in amongst all the noise that surrounds the Nissan brand? Not leaving aside that they've got companies that cars called Note and Leaf and that sort of thing. How do you cut out all the news stories about Nissan and the people buying and selling cars and some clown in Nissan just cut me off at the lights? How do you get rid of all that noise so that you can find the 2 or 3 tweets a day that are about a problem with a new Nissan car? And so we kind of we came up with some ideas as to how you might do that using a mixture of some of the AI techniques that Pete was learning about and some of the kind of linguistic stuff that I've been doing. We presented together from at Nissan the next day. They kind of liked it and gave us a bit of seed money, and that's kind of how the kind of Wordnerds got off the ground, I suppose. From my perspective, Pete, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's that very much tallies with my recollection of things. I was happily minding my own business, ignorant of the vagaries of Scottish mythology and Victorian ghost stories. And we met in a pub. One of my devs that was working with us at the time said, "Oh, you should meet Steve. He's a good guy. You guys got a similar sense of humor." We had a great chat. We started talking, and then that Nissan thing happened. And what Steve didn't tell you was we were halfway through, and I was like, "Look, I think this might work. This is the problem, blah, blah, blah." And he sat up all night and he put together 21 syntactic rules. And in the morning when we pitched to Nissan, it was like, "Look, you asked us to look at your data. We didn't. You asked us to show you software. We haven't got any. But we have got this really half-assed idea about how we can take really, really new AI and really, really old corpus linguistics and some of these other techniques." Because one of the interesting things for us is that innovation really happens at the intersection of disciplines. Everything in linguistics has been done. Everything in data science has been done. But when you get linguistics and put that through data science, you get some kind of magic that takes place. And that's what we started doing. We sat Steve in a room with my developers and plugged his massive head into the internet. And that was where the kind of magic came from. And it started in the corner of my old agency, Daykin and Story, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually it ate the agency. Eventually we got to a stage where I was running 2 full-time jobs trying to do the agency and get Wordnerds going. We took it to some local VCs and we showed it to a couple of people. And one guy was like, "Look, this is incredible. You've already got some huge brands on this. You've got early traction. It's a really interesting idea. We haven't seen anything like it. We'll really happily fund it. Here's a ton of money." And what do you do with an agency? There's not a lot of residual value in an agency. And turns out the most valuable thing we had wasn't the customers, it wasn't the contracts, it was the staff. So we went back to the VC and said, "Give us more money and we'll keep this team together, or at least the core of it." And they did, which was the single best 25 minutes of our lives. I think they doubled the amount of money they put in for no extra equity. It was like, yeah, brilliant. That's a much more marketable idea if you've got an amazing team. And we started Wordnerds in June 2019, full time. And up until a few months ago, we thought we were really good at SaaS. We thought thought SaaS was easy. We were like, "Look, every week the graphs just keep going up. This is a piece of piss."
Tick, tick, tick.
Yeah, totally. And then lockdown happened. And it turns out when the majority of your customers are rail operating companies and nobody's getting the train anymore, all of a sudden things start to look a little bit different. So we've been through the whole pivot. We've been through the whole, okay, what the hell do we do with that? Let's go after people who are spending money, or people with whom their customers are spending money. So we moved into retail. We've now signed up Marks and Spencer's, Sainsbury's, Ocado, some of the kind of the big marquee names who are using us to look at their customer data, looking at, cross-channel stuff from voice to email complaints and in-app stuff and website feedback, all that kind of thing. And honestly, we are making this shit up as we go along. We are having a tremendous amount of fun learning about how to build a software company, how to do something with words that nobody's ever done before. We're coming up against problems that no humans have ever tried to solve before. And it's just hilarious and hard and intoxicating in equal measure, and we're having a right giggle as we make it up.
It's really interesting though, because there's so many people who start these kind of businesses and they just never quite manage to achieve that big jump that you did. But it sounds to me like one of the reasons that you really did that was that you started off with the problem, whereas sometimes actually people start with the solution. You know, I've got this great idea, but actually, you know, is that really solving the problem? Whereas you started with a very specific individual company with a very explicit problem, and that really gave you the opportunity to almost hone that solution. Do you think that's really influenced how quickly you've been able to accelerate there?
I think it's definitely a balancing act. So then there's always the danger of just trying to follow the next problem, and eventually that becomes unsustainable. And working out, I think, defining where the edge of the problem that you're solving is a challenge that we come up against all the time as words. There's all kinds of different things you can do with a system that's essentially taught a computer how to read. There's no kind of limit on the stuff that we do. So you know, in the past we've been asked, can you do stuff with you know, with doctors' notes? Can you do stuff with legal data? Can you and kind of understanding that is really kind of, that's a real challenge in terms of, so this is just a tiny little bit further this way, but crossing a line, and where do you put the line? But yeah, on the other hand, I think that because we didn't start with some cool tech and then try to find a place that it goes, we started with a problem and then built cool tech to solve it. I think that's been huge. And I think it does, even today, when a new idea comes in, when a new methodology or a new bit of tech or, you know, a new way of approaching something comes in, we're very strict on that test. We're very good, I think, at not doing stuff just because it's cool or just because it makes us look clever. And I think that's definitely come out of the fact that we started with a defined problem that we could attack on literally day one of working together.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would add to it by saying I think the problem is the most fundamental thing always, and every day it is. I think when we were an agency, we used to do really well in pitches, and our little mantra then was that the agency that listens the most wins the pitch, because the more you make the pitch about the problems that the customer has expressed, and the less you talk about your agency, the better you do. And the same is true now as a SaaS business. And what's been really interesting is there's loads of differences between working as an agency and working in SaaS, but there's loads of similarities as well. And the thing, you know, whenever we have a problem with a sale, whenever it's been in the pipeline 6 months, we can't get it to convert, or the person leaves or whatever, somewhere down the line, when we go back and forensically do a kind of do a sort of post-mortem, and we always do, to find out what's gone wrong, it always goes back to the discovery meeting, and it always goes back to not nailing the pain. It's kind of like, you know, it wasn't a big enough problem for them, or they weren't motivated to solve it, or, you know, the reason it's been 6 months in the pipeline is because we didn't listen to the problem enough, and we didn't diagnose it as a problem that we could fix, or it was just some kind of, you know, disjunct there. And it's always that. It's not their problem.
Conversely, we do get this kind of situation where people, we have had prospects come to us that just think the tech's so cool that they like, you know, I just really want to play with this stuff. Can we give you some money to do that? And they've almost always churned eventually because they didn't have that kind of key thing. And it is so it's that we are a lot kind of more clear about now, is that they have to sort of sell us as well, that this is a problem that they have got, because any SaaS professionals out there will know that churn is also it's also a significant issue. So if you are bringing in a lot of the wrong customer, that is going to eventually come back to bite you. And yeah, I think the fact that the tech is cool does mean sometimes people, you have to kind of press them on, do you actually really have a burning need for this?
I think that goes as well to the fact that, you know, especially in bigger organizations, quite often one of the things that I quite often work with businesses around is about their onboarding, which you would think, well, hang on a minute, you're do sales. Why are you talking about onboarding? And it's because to me that's like the second sale. The first sale is getting the product in. The second sale is getting the product used. Because if they're not using it, if they're, it's not, people aren't engaging with it, if the users aren't, actually coming on board with it, if they're not using the outputs, then, within 6 weeks, basically, you've lost your renewal. They're not going to stick with you because, at the cold face, it's not really being engaged. So, and I think that goes back to, if people haven't got that problem, at that point in time, you're saying, wow, great, we've bought this new bit of software. If they're thinking, brilliant, I've got better things to do with my life because that's not a big enough problem for me to have time to solve on my priority list, then it's never going to go anywhere. So that's a really interesting one. And obviously the first business you got involved with was Nissan. There must have been a time when you came outside of that. And do you remember your first sale, like sort of post that point in your journey?
I believe I'm right in saying, and apologies, so a couple of organizations came in at quite a similar time. We had this kind of period, and at this point we were still working out what it was, what we wanted to kind of to keep from what we built for Nissan, what we thought would be, it could be bigger, and where the kind of the real opportunities were going forward. I think that our second sale was Tommy Tippy, baby bottle brand. So again, kind of similar consumer kind of facing stuff, which was a useful kind of step forward. The reason that Pete and I looked at each other and laughed there was one of the first meetings that we had with Tommy Tippy was among the most the best meetings that I've ever been in. They had a kind of 4 people in the room from Tommy Tippy, big screen up on the wall that they were projecting onto, and so huge kind of screen share on this kind of basically on this wall on the side of the in the side of the room. A young kind of sort of newish employee was controlling it. They were giving us kind of a few ideas of the sort of stuff they were looking for. One of the things they were interested in at that point was how their new advertising campaigns were going down. And they said, well, why don't we show you the new advertising campaigns to give you a sense of that? And they had their, I think it was their Vimeo account. The guy was typing in, trying to find the right video. And they said to him, can't seem to find it. Oh, type in nipple vision, which was the name of the advertising campaign they were doing because, obviously they had a new sort of sippy cup that kind of that had a sort of nipple on it. So type in nipple vision. He typed it into the wrong box. So he didn't search Tommy Tippy's videos for nipple vision. He searched the entire internet for nipple vision. So this great big wall of boobs was like projected in like 50 feet across this wall. And I thought, yeah, this is Wordnerds seems like a fun place to work. But anyway, I think they were a really good second customer because they opened our minds a little bit as to what this could do. They were more interested in review data, but they were also kind of close enough. We realized very quickly that this was going to work for large organizations who care about customers or stakeholders of some kind, regular people, and finding out what they have to say. So I think it was a good sort of second step for us.
Do you remember the biggest problem that meant that we nearly didn't get through procurement that Tom Tippy had with us?
Don't remember.
So at the time they were doing a kind of market horizon scan of software, and they were like, yeah, no, we've had a look around. Your technology is definitely the best. We just don't know how we're going to sell it into the sort of senior management team because it's just not believable. And we were like, well, what do you mean? Because we're only a little startup. There's only the few of us, but we've got this agency behind us. We know what we're doing. We'll definitely build it out in the direction. Like, no. We believe all of that. It's just that we're based up in Cramlington and you're based in Gateshead, and we're only about 8 miles apart. And they're not going to believe that we've looked the whole world for something, and actually the one that we found is 8 miles away in Gateshead. So like, I don't know, do you fancy moving down south or something? So that was
Move
a
to,
big
move to
problem.
London and double the price, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. So obviously that was like your first like post Nissan sale. Things have obviously moved on a lot since then. So obviously there's more than just a few of you now. You're a much bigger organization, more people selling, more people approaching customers, you know, having those meetings. What have you found has been the biggest change in scaling up like that with your sales?
So what's the biggest change? So I think all the advice we got, we spoke to some real sales experts right at the start of this journey, Victoria. You were one of them, and we got a bunch of advice about how to sell this stuff. And one of the good bits of advice we got was basically find something that works and just stick with that until you sort of know where you're going. And one of the things that work for us is getting up on a stage somewhere and getting a bit of data. Everybody's a word nerd. Everybody loves words. Somewhere along the line, you can always find something interesting to talk about. Whoever you're speaking to, you crunch a bit of data, you find something interesting. We go on stage, we tell them our one joke, and we I take the piss out of Steve for being stupidly tall and Scottish, and a nerd, and not losing his virginity until he was 47. And then Steve pretends to be all injured and says something clever and makes me look stupid. And everybody loves it, gets immediately on his side, and then he gives them some data. And between stage and bar, we get 6 or 7 leads, and we're away. And we rinse and repeated that for months and months and months when we first started off, and it got to the stage where we practically choreographed the walk from the stage to the bar. It was down pat, and it was doing great. And then COVID. And when your entire sales shtick is based on live events, and all of a sudden the world doesn't have any more live events, you end up in a situation where it's like, okay, what's the plan B? And there just wasn't a plan B. So, and at that stage, we read Aaron Ross, and we read all these books, and we started doing outreach, and we started doing all these other things. And you know what? The rest of the world did exactly the same. And everybody's inbox got full of emails that all said, hey, person's role, as role, you must have this problem. We solve this problem for these people. And these kind of identikit kind of outreach emails that 18 months, 2 years ago probably got you some meetings, but nowadays everybody was just delete. Mm-hmm. And I think finding a plan B that works in a world where there's no events has been really hard for us. And we tried a bunch of different things. We were doing really well from kind of referrals, from network, from kind of partners and all of that kind of thing. But none of that is stuff that you can actually change. None of that's proactive. All of that stuff is reactive. Yeah. And I think we've finally found it, relatively recently. And it's coincided ironically with the world opening up again and events happening again. And we found it in the guise of lead magnets. So producing really high quality reports of the stuff that we do, that are very specific and very specifically targeted to an ideal customer profile that we've really thought about. And producing those bits of reports, and then our SDRs using those as a lever for outreach to cut through the noise, basically by saying, hey, look, your company features in this report, and this is what we found about you, and what do you think about this, and do you want to comment on it, and we've got a webinar about this, and basically producing a facsimile of a live event where I can take the piss out of Steve for being tall and not losing his virginity until he was 53. And basically doing that, and then that opens the door for conversations, and then we disco them and demo them and go through that process. But it's been a journey getting there, and we tried it before, but for whatever reason it didn't work, whether the reports weren't high quality enough or they weren't specific enough. And you can be really close to something that works and not be getting the data through that's telling you that it's working, and not knowing why, and you just make a little tweak, and all of a sudden you're booking 20, 30 meetings and you're in a whole different world.
I think it's a really interesting one as well, because I think you're right. I think so much changed during like COVID and lockdown. And I think even the events that did go ahead, the virtual events, it was never the same. I don't think they ever got that real engagement. I think quite often people would be like attending a live virtual event while also being on Facebook and making their dinner. You know, they'd be doing 3 different things. So I don't think you ever got that focus of attention, I think, that you do when people are all in the same room, you know.
It's interesting. Our criteria for whether or not we pay to speak at an event is can we get a speaking slot, even if it's just 5 minutes on stage. Can we get it just before a break? Ideally, one that isn't a dinner break, so where people are milling around. And obviously, if we have to have a stand, we'll have a stand. But the idea of that is because basically we know that that all of the useful discussions happen in that break immediately after you get off stage. And the problem with online events is there isn't the bit between the things that people turn up for, where you can talk to people and it's not really building relationships, but it's following up those conversations, because by the time they get back to work the next day, it's too late. They're busy. There's something else in their inbox. You know, there's another crisis. There's another fire to fight, and it just doesn't work with online events.
Yeah, I get that. I don't know about you guys, but I'm just starting to go back to in-person events, and it's been so nice. It's been so nice seeing people. I'm at one next week and one the week after, actually. And I was at one. I've been at a few recently. Can you tell I'm now ODing on seeing people? You know, like,
it surprises me because you've always been such an introvert, Victoria. so shy and retiring. I wouldn't have picked you as an events type.
Honestly, it is hilarious. The one thing I will say is really funny, though, is that people see me at events and they're like, "Hi, it's so good to see you." And hi, and I'm like, I'm not touching people, but thanks anyway. Which, to be fair, is I've always actually been a little bit like that. I'm a bit like, yeah, it's great to see you, but I don't need to hug. But now I have an excuse. It's like the best of every world, you know. I can go to events, I can see people, and I don't have to hug them. It's like a win-win-win, you know. So obviously the world sort of changed a little bit for you then. So did you move all of your like face-to-face meetings and demonstrations online? Were you already doing them online? Was there a big change there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we used to spend a lot of time and money going down to London, where a lot of this kind of stuff, a lot of kind of our ideal customer prospects were based. So actually, a lot of that has remained on Zoom, I think it's fair to say. And there's lots and lots of benefits of that. Firstly, you can record it. I think the other thing that that Pete didn't say about the big changes that we've had at Wordnerds recently is that we have Pete's taken a big step back from the sales process. Now, you would not believe this, Victoria, having spoken to him for half an hour, but Pete is a very charismatic, very engaging salesperson. And it was a big step, which obviously we're making all over the business, right? Our best devs are now spending less time coding and more time training other devs so that we can kind of scale that part of the business. And there's a similar thing happening in sales. And when you have a really kind of a star salesperson, making that decision of having him step out so that others can go out and make their mistakes and have these conversations and lead things through from start to finish. That's been a huge thing. And Pete's kind of now more in a sort of coaching role for the frontline salespeople. He's doing a lot more of that. Our sales manager, Helen, who's been amazing, who's is in the process of developing her team, is also now kind of doing more coaching and less direct selling. And one of the great things about Zoom becoming the way in which you sell now is that you can record the demos. We use a brilliant software platform called Refract.
Refract.io, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're absolutely great. Really set up for sales coaching. So we put all of our discovery calls and our demos into that. Obviously, software, I think it's also probably slightly easier to demo when you can just share your screen and you've got kind of control of what's going on. So I think that's really useful. So actually, there's lockdown selling, I think, has been a really good way of. It has really kind of worked for us, and it means we get to spend less time on trains, which I'm a bit sad about. But other than that, it's I think really been there's definitely, I think, the kind of the merge model of selling through Zoom, I think, has been really good for us overall.
I totally agree. It turns out the reason we went to London wasn't because you had to go to London to sell. The reason we went to London is because we both got kids. So it was just lots easier, and we could sit in a pub in London and go, "Oh, isn't this nice?" So we missed that. That's not as good. But that aside, no, I think Steve's absolutely right, and I think, you know, if you look at our longest ever sale is a rail company who shall not be named, and they're fantastic customers, and we love them to bits. And they were 18 months in the pipeline.
Wow.
Closed them on a Thursday during lockdown, and couldn't even go to the pub to celebrate it. But, you know, we closed them. That's the main thing. We closed them, and that was great. The next day, we got a phone call at 6 o'clock from a major San Francisco-based media company. We'll call them, we're not allowed to mention their name for legal reasons, let's call them Yippee. And they rang us at 6 o'clock on a Friday night. By midnight, we closed the deal. And that was our fastest ever sale. And that happened all across Zoom in a few hours, from disco to demo to contracts being hastily written up to contracts being signed. And they're still a customer now, and they're one of our best customers. And they're fantastic. And that just would not have happened in a pre-pandemic world. We would have been, again, there would have been positive sides to this, but we would have been on a plane to San Fran. We would have, you know, gone to meet them, glad-handed them, a couple of nights in a hotel, back there a couple of weeks later. It would have cost us a few grand in kind of cost of sales, and just because that was what was expected. Whereas now it's entirely reasonable for it all to happen on Zoom, and for the reason Steve says, actually in some ways it's a lot better for us from a sort of technical perspective. You do miss the human element. There is an element of kind of rapport building and relationship building, and that is still important. But people don't buy you because of rapport and relationship, as you know, Victoria. Yeah. People buy you because you solve a massive problem for them. And if they like you and they trust you and all that kind of thing, that makes that process easier and quicker, but it doesn't define that process.
I think the other thing is as well, I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about this move to Zoom as well has been about volume. You know, all of a sudden your best salesperson isn't doing, or maybe a max of, I don't know, 7 or 8 meetings a week. You know, all of a sudden they can be doing 12, you know, they can be, you know, you can really, you know, take that. They can be doing 3, maybe 4 demos a day quite often. Some businesses, depend on, you know, what stage in the sale they're getting involved, they might be doing even more than that. You know, they might be doing 5, sometimes 6, you know, for their little intro things. So I think there's also a real benefit here around being able to get more for less, almost, because all of a sudden that travel time is being turned into valuable sales time, which I know with some of my clients, it's actually meant that they've been able to almost pause some of their recruitment because they're being able to deliver those extra, you know, customer interactions, those prospect interactions with the number of staff they've already got, because they've got that time back all of a sudden. So it does seem, I mean, my view is that I think there's a place for both those things. And I think there will be some people who sometimes you will still go and see face to face, but I do think that increasingly we're so used to it now. I think that's always been the case. You know, at one point in time, you were going to go and speak to, I don't know, a FTSE 100 company or whatever. They would expect you to turn up in their boardroom, you know, with all your kit on and ready to go with, you know, your PowerPoint slides and that whole thing. Whereas now that expectation's just completely gone, and it's all about, well, actually my time's valuable. How quickly can we do this, you know?
On that point, something else that we've noticed is that when you're in the disco meeting, and you ask the question about kind of who else needs to be in the demo that we're arranging, or you know, who's the decision maker here, or however else you want to phrase it that isn't kind of making the person you're speaking to sound like a pleb. You know, when you ask that question, because historically you would try and get everybody in the room so you could rock up to their place and spend 1 train ticket and 1 hotel fare and all that kind of thing. Whereas now, I think what we're finding is we're often finding the process is kind of, you know, outreach or inbound or whatever it is, disco, demo 1, demo 2. And demo 1 is the operational person who's going to be using the software, and they're basically doing the market analysis, and they're looking at your competitors, they're looking at you, And before they rope their boss in, they want to do a level of kind of sanity checking, and they want to do a level of kind of, right, am I going to look like an idiot if I put these, this freakishly tall Scottish virgin from Newcastle, if we stick him in front of the boardroom, like, am I going to look like a dick? Yeah, I probably am, right? So let's not do that. Whereas if they get to sort of do a check first and look at our stuff and go, actually, these guys know what they're talking about, they'll then arrange another meeting with their boss involved, and they'll be on your side during that meeting, and they'll be like, oh, show them the bit about this, and like blah, 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 blah. And that's like a really interesting and actually quite a useful dynamic. If you can get that person on board and have them fighting your corner and almost turning them into your champion, it's, on the one hand, it's a bit frustrating because there's more steps to it, but on the other hand, it can actually be quite effective. And we've seen a lot more of that in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's absolutely right. Repeated where I'm like some of the different places that I'm working around as well. The other thing that I've noticed is, well, one of the things that I've been working with a couple of businesses around as well is about splitting demos up. One of the things that I've been working with a particular group of salespeople about at the moment is being, do you really need 12 people in a demo? Do you really need 12 people in a demo? Because those 12 people don't want to see the same thing. So actually, why not really understand who those people are before the session and say, actually, you know what, tech team, what is it you need to know? Well, I need to know it's going to work with our other systems. Brilliant. Let's put 20 minutes in and we'll just focus on that with you. Finance team, what do we need to know with you? Right, I need to know like how it works from an invoicing, and you turn to, right, let's put a little separate meeting in with you. And I've seen, from my point of view, looking at when we've actually split demos like that, they're far more effective because you don't suddenly get derailed from your main objective around, working with the actual decision makers to show them how you solve the problem. You don't suddenly get derailed off other people who've been told to attend to validate something. They're not really interested in the sales stuff. They just want to know these simple questions. But in order to validate the fact that they've got an hour in their diary or whatever it might be, they feel like they have to sort of throw these like curveballs in. You'll be in the middle of doing something and like, right, but what about Microsoft Edge and how it interacts in that environment? And you're like, what are we talking about now? Like, where did that come from? And you've got to drop the moment of going, and here, the most amazing solution in the world. Done it. What do you mean Microsoft Edge? Right, okay, now I've got to deal with this. Like, crappy question. So I think the other thing is that all of a sudden, if you as a salesperson, especially these bigger sales with, multiple stakeholders and a more complex buying process, it really, if you take the power, it gives you the power to say, actually, no, you're not all coming on one demo. This is how we're going to do it. And that's just like so powerful. But all of a sudden, it looks like you're being super helpful, respecting people's time, and you're actually giving the right people exactly what they need. So, I definitely think, doing more than one bite of a cherry, maybe a couple of different demos with different types of people in the organization. And also that whole thing of just like exploding out something. If you've got millions of people coming and you're thinking, I don't know if you have this as well. I don't know if you let people turn up with their cameras off. Because I hate that as well. You have like 8 people turn up and like 7 of them got their cameras off and no name tag, and you're like, okay, I'm literally just talking to a wall of like random people. And like for me personally, like I do not let that pass. I'm like, okay, so pleased there's so many people of you here. It'd be lovely for us to say hello face to face. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Victoria. Right. So who's on camera number 1? Come and say hello. What's your name? What do you do? And that's the only thing about these online demos is the salespeople allow people to come into those meetings with their cameras off, their mics off, and they've got no idea who they are. I was sitting in a demo the other day, just doing some from an observational point of view, and the demo overran. Another pet hate of mine. We'd had 12 people on the demo. Out of the 12, 9 didn't have cameras on. At 3 minutes past the hour, we lost 2 people. And by the time the salesperson wrapped up at 1:24, we'd lost 7. But what they hadn't realised was the person that we'd lost, one of the 2 people we'd lost just past the hour, was the MD. So the most important person, you didn't know who they were. you didn't have them on camera, and you overran, so they actually left. So what that left was a few people in the room who were unable to make a decision because, you know, the key player had gone because they had other things to do. You know, he'd overran. So, oh wow, you've had my pet hate rant there. Right, there you go. So all the challenges. But do you come across this as well? You must come across some of these challenges with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say because I tend to these days only get brought into sales conversations for either, obviously, Pete to make fun of me about my virginity, but also just for anyone watching. I've got 2 kids. Let's not. Done it at least twice.
You ever done a DNA?
Oh, they're both very, very tall, so that's a good sign. That's a good sign. But I only ever generally get brought into sales meetings when there are particularly difficult technical questions to be answered or linguistic questions to be answered, and it's always the person with their camera off who has the 7 incredibly difficult questions kind of coming in. And I think there is something to that as well. I think that I don't know if that's a coincidence or that's just because people with nasty questions like turn their cameras off. I think it does make you feel less engaged with the with what's going on the screen. I'm sure we've all had that when, you know, if you're at a kind of, you know, a boring webinar, unlike Victoria's amazing ones, where no one can see you, so you're not fully focused in on what's happening there. So I think it is, and you're right, it's a very difficult, because we're still sort of figuring out etiquette, these kind of things. And we all know that you can't, if you're in a boardroom, you can't just walk out without saying anything halfway through a meeting. But we haven't quite figured out yet what that looks like for Zoom, and people are making different decisions about, or making different judgment calls about what they think it should be. So it's a really difficult situation. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The best you can do is figure out who's in the room and figure out who the people are that you really need to, and figure out exactly what you need to get from that meeting, and do it as early as possible as you can in the meeting. Because I think if you do see a bunch of blank screens, people are more likely to drift away.
In some ways, though, it is quite honest in the sense that it's kind of, you know, if somebody's there and it's not for them, like if they're dropping out of the meeting, then fine. At least you know, it's that thing of it's why you write outreach emails with 1 point in it, because you know that if somebody doesn't respond to that, they haven't got that problem, and you're at least getting some data from somebody ignoring you, and you can do that. And I think you're right about the thing about people are still working out what's going on. It wasn't a sales situation, but Steve did a interview for a role that we had, and got a candidate turned up to do a kind of screening call, and Steve kind of was asking some questions, and it wasn't feeling right, and this guy was kind of answering these questions, and it was kind of like, okay, great, yeah, whatever. And then Steve's like, have you got any questions for us? And the guy's like, yeah, I've got loads. And he had this big list of like questions, and Steve's like sitting there going, right, what's going on here? And he went like this on the screen. He starts looking in the thing, and he sees on the back wall of where this guy was doing the interview from, it was one of our competitors. And this guy was doing a job interview from the office of one of our competitors with their logo in the back, and trying to pump us for information about how we do loads of like really kind of technical things. And Steve was like, look, I'm not going to answer your questions. You're clearly not interested in this job. You know, blah, blah, blah. And again, you know, on the one hand, that's like mental and hilarious. And on the other hand, you know, that probably still went on in the before times, but somebody would turn up to your office in a suit and you'd have no idea that they were a ringer or a plant. And at least the whole thing's out in the open a bit more now. And how stupid do you have to be not to go home to do that interview as well, by the way?
That's just unbelievable, that though, isn't it? You just think, what are you thinking? Oh my goodness.
I know.
Yeah. I'm now applying for every single job they advertise at the competitor. Like, you know, manager. Well, go. Yeah.
They keep turning you down though, don't you? You're not even getting the screening interview, aren't you now?
We've learned from our mistakes. Yeah, it's good.
Oh my! But you're right. Like, the whole world's changed now. Online, but I think the good thing about it is I think everyone is so much more tech savvy now. And of course, a lot of what you guys are involved with, it's all about, you know, artificial intelligence. Like, you know, is you're like plugging brains into the internet, you know, all that kind of thing that you were mentioning before. So how are you using that to inform your own sales approaches? Is that supporting you with that?
I'll go first on this one. So, I think there's definitely a thing about AI where AI is the new, or was the new, bullshit buzzword that people just assume is magic. For a while it was.
Oh, is it not?
yeah, it totally is. If people want to buy Wordnerds, yeah, it totally is. No, for a while it was, I don't care what the question is, the answer is blockchain, and then it was AI, and now it's edge computing or whatever it is next. And I think there's a lot of bullshit about AI. And what is AI? AI is just sort of stuff that you wouldn't expect a computer to be able to do that a computer can now be able to do, and that can be really useful, but it can also be not useful at all. And I think there's a lot of very low value bits of sales software out there, that particularly around prospecting and particularly around like lead generation, where they'll kind of say, oh, we'll generate you loads of leads. Just tell us what leads you're after, and we'll come back. And we'll give you 15 meetings a second. Yeah. You kind of go, okay. And we've tried it longhand, right? We've tried the low value outreach where it's a pretty generic email, not a targeted list. It's volume over value and all that kind of thing, and it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work when a human's doing it, and it doesn't work when a bot's doing it. Mm-hmm. Because it's bullshit, and there's loads of sort of people doing it, and your inbox is full of AI. It's full of bots who have scraped bits of information from you, sometimes comically wrong. So I don't know if anybody does any kind of, I don't know, they help out at the kids' school, or they're a governor or something like that, and you get loads of things going, as the person in charge of this school, and it's like, right, so you've been on my LinkedIn profile and you've got this completely wrong, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of that is just basically automated crap. But I think there is a small amount of when people are using AI really, really well, and you don't know it's AI, and really what they're doing is just doing kind of complicated things well, then it can be useful. I think where we use it is, obviously we use, again, in what we do and what Wordnerds do, we're using AI with a ton of other stuff as well that makes it not rubbish, to understand what people are saying in text. And actually, it's that thing of, I kind of, I hear, I sort of understand, or whatever it is, I see, I really get it. And so rather than saying, hey, we can do this with you, what we do is we run the AI on their data, we find actual data, and we go to them saying, like, look, have a look at this. Is that interesting? We can find this out about you. Do you want to have a chat about this? I once went to a pitch in London for another sort of train company, and the person sort of sat down and said, like, basically their opening gambit to me was, oh, you're from the Northeast. I'm from Hebburn, which is kind of the Gaza Strip of the Northeast. So I was like, oh, lovely. Heaven's lush. Heaven's gonna kick my head in. No, and there was class. So we had a bit of kind of Northeast crack, because that's what happens if you're from the Northeast and you go somewhere else in the world and somebody else is from the Northeast. You've got that kind of like, yeah, great, we're better than everybody else in this room, aren't we? Brilliant. So we had that, and then they were like, right. And then the other guy spoke. He's like, right, I've seen loads of things like this. It's all shit. Like, why should I care what you're saying? So I was like, okay. And happily, I'd been on the phone to Floaty Brain in Tankier on the morning. Just, have you had any chance to run any of that data? And we'd had a chat about the data. And Steve has done his usual thing of just like starting with a big morass of nebulous, esoteric crap and pulling out 5 or 6 real nuggets of gold. And I was just like, there's 3 ticket machines at this station, and only 2 of them are out of order, and you've had queues out the block for 3 days in a row and you haven't fixed it. The 7:28 this morning at this thing got cancelled here, and the train that came in behind it could have waited 5 minutes, picked up 100 people. There was space on it, but you let it run through, blah, blah, blah. And there was literally 6 or 7 like really actionable things that they could have done stuff about, that we picked up through our kind of AI and that kind of thing, that we just told them. And by the time I got through my list of 7 things that Steve had massively cheated me on, You know, I look around the room and everybody had shut up, everybody's mouths was open, and where that happens, it's great. And being able to chew that amount of data that quickly and get back to that amount of stuff. But it's not just AI, that's good tech. And that's good tech built over a long period of time by linguists, by, you know, statisticians, by data scientists, by people that are smarter than me, that know what they're doing better than me, basically. And I think where you use tech like that, there's all kinds of things you can do.
That's really interesting, though, because what you're really saying there in many ways is that whatever technology you're using isn't replacing personalization, because that's really what that's about. You're using tech to produce a highly personalized sales approach and pitch, which, to be honest, always has been and probably always will be the most effective outreach that you can do, to be honest with you, because people are selfish, so they only care about themselves, you know. So if you can say, well, actually, yes, I solved this generic problem, it's like, yeah, right, whatever. If they say, yeah, but what about your problem, your exact problem that I can help you solve, all of a sudden people are interested. And really, that's what you're saying there, isn't it?
This is a pet peeve of mine, because I think it, and it's interesting because I think when we started, we got the way in which we articulated that we were AI, we got it wrong, because we used words like revolutionary and game changing and all this kind of stuff. And actually, you know, you're a busy person in an office. The last thing you want is a revolution. That's not that's not a useful thing to do. You don't want your game changed. You're happy with the game the way it is. You just want it to be able to play the game slightly better. And so we've done a lot of work on that. And I do think that our field doesn't do itself any favors in that regard. AI generally, and Pete's absolutely right. There's a lot of kind of rubbish out there, and a lot of, you know, and the conversation kind of changed from, with us, it's changed from what is this to how are you different from this crap thing that I tried, which we obviously say we don't sneak into people's interview processes. But the other, but I think it comes back, and I'm so sorry, people may have heard me say this before. It's one of my little hobby horses, but it goes back to Alan Turing. It goes back to the Turing test of this idea of, you know, the way you judge AI is by could you mistake it for a human, which is not a good way of thinking about AI, and it's not a good way of trying to sell AI. We went through, you know, if you compare it to automation, and one of our first kind of trips out together was to go to Nissan's factory, where you see this absolute miracle of automation, of all these kind of huge mechanical arms moving things around the factory. And obviously this is analogous to AI, because automation was replacing things that human beings used to do with their bodies, and AI is replacing things that human beings used to do with their minds. What you don't see in Nissan's factory is a robot painted to look like a human being carrying boxes around. What they've taken one aspect of a human being, their arm, and they've said, how can we make this, you know, be able to lift way more than a human being ever could? How can we take that one aspect and make and like supercharge it and turn it into something better for doing that one specific thing? And I think AI is actually going to end up being quite a similar thing of, what are the things that we can do where, rather than trying to be a human, rather than trying to build that kind of massive, that massive, which isn't particularly useful because we've got humans, take one thing that they do and do it on a scale that they couldn't do it. Human beings can't read through the mountain of data that a big company will get on their social feeds and their review processes and their surveys and so on and so forth. But you know, you can train an AI to do that, and then the human being is still there to action and to make decisions and to do those kind of things. So I think that AI, in attempting to be this kind of HAL, you know, this kind of shutting the pod bay doors and doing, and that is not what certainly I think AI is going to be. AI is going to be a tool in amongst lots of other tools, as Pete says, where we do way more than AI in order to make our thing work. I think that's where its real power lies.
Just this is really interesting. It's not a discussion we've had, and actually, like, I wish we had a beer now, because I think it's that it's that thing of the difference between complicated and complex. And I think building a car is complicated. I think there's a lot of moving parts. There's lots of things in a car. There's more lines of code in a car now than in, whatever that statistic is. There's just, it's a very complicated thing, but it's not complex. Where complexity is defined as loads of different, sometimes unrelated moving parts that aren't predictable. Building a car is predictable. You can, if you wanted to, engineer a linear process for every single part of it, and all that process would be to build that car. That's great if you want to build that car. It's no good if you then next week want to build a helicopter. A sales process isn't like that. A sales process requires you to engage with sometimes capricious, sometimes selfish, sometimes busy human beings. Their needs change all the time. How many times have you started a sales process in January and by February the guy you're talking to has moved on, and you've got his boss or his replacement who doesn't care, and there's so many different things in the sales process that can change, that you need to think about, that even with us, one sale is completely different to another sale. For one product, we can have a completely different use case. We can have a completely different reason for getting it in. They can be equally as compelling. They can be equally as valuable, but it's just so different. And trying to find any AI that shortcuts that process, unless it is as Steve says, a really specific part of it, it's just not going to be useful, because it's not personalized, as you say, Victoria. It's not responsive to the things that they really care about. Because at the end of the day, that's what sales is. It's identifying a problem and proving to somebody beyond doubt that you are the only people that can solve that problem in the time scale they want for the money that they're prepared to pay.
I think as well, it's that whole thing that sales is a two-way process. I always say sales is just a conversation. It's just a conversation with purpose, but you never know what the other person's going to say. So you can, it's why sales scripts don't work. You can anticipate what they might say, but that's the thing about human beings, because as long as they're involved with the process, you just don't know what they're going to do next, really, do you?
And who doesn't love that game when the guy rings you and goes, "Hey, would you like to save money on your energy bills?" Who doesn't love going, no, I want to pay more on my energy. Can I pay double on my energy bills, please? Because it's just so much fun. You're right. Scripts don't work.
It's really bad. So I always feel so sorry for some of those people who are still using them as well, because quite often they're in these vast call centers using these auto dialers. We think, you're not having a good day anyway, and now you're having to ring me, and I know you don't want to talk to me, and you're really not going to want to hear what I've got to say, actually. So shall we just move on, But yeah, I think it's been a while, hasn't it? But my first ever sales job, that was exactly what it was. I did 4 days selling double glazing. That was my first ever sales job on the phones. And literally it was old school. It was old school desks. And was it 4 till 9? So, 4 till 9 in the evening, exactly when people want the phone to ring at home. And they you got a ripped page out of the phone directory, like the phone book. You get a ripped page out of that. It was an old school phone with an actual wire attached and a dial.
Wow.
That was it. And you got a script, and that was what you did. And I can virtually still repeat the script. It was, "Hello, Mr. Insert name here. Are you the homeowner?" I mean, straight away when that happens, it's not going to be a good call, is it?
Should we do it? Should we role play the call? Let's role play the call. All right.
I did.
Hello.
Oh God! Don't make me sound organizing. I did it for 4 nights.
Oh, come on, Victoria! Role play the call, man.
Went back. I don't. You know what it is? I don't know if the company's still in business. I should probably check. Actually, they might be hunting me down right now. Actually, no. It was before I was married. They wouldn't recognise me, so that's fine. But it was. I didn't. So it was 4 nights. And I never went back, so I never even got paid for it, because I just thought, I just can't go back. I was just it felt so morally reprehensible ringing these, poor women putting their kids to bed, and these guys who are, trying to cook the dinner, and it was just horrendous. So, but hey, a script, I've never liked them. It's probably why it took me a while to get back into sales after that, to be fair. So there we go. Anyway, that was a sidetrack. into double glazing salespeople. Makes me feel a bit dirty, you know. So we'll just move straight past it. So
it's a little bit, Dory, with I remember we had an away day recently. We got a whole team, went to a lovely kind of stately home, and all the different bits of the company had a chance to present what their bit of the company is. And our SDRs did a really great presentation of what their of what they do. And one of our devs, this amazing lugubrious man who is one of my favorite people in the world, put his hand up and he sort of did any questions at the end, and he said, "Yeah, is your job not really depressing? Is it not like, do you not, how do you, you know, classic dev, but like, do you not get with all the rejection and all that sort of thing?" And I think you know, the fact that, because that you couldn't have been the only person that left after 4 days in that company.
No.
You know, and ensuring that, you know, that your sales team are kind of supported and looked after, and you know, that I think that's a big part of what I see Pete and Helen doing an awful lot. And as Pete said, you know, the lockdown and the pandemic period was a difficult time to be reaching out to people and trying to do this stuff. And I think taking care of people, ensuring that they know it's okay not to be okay, ensuring that they know that we understand what they're going through and that kind of stuff. It's a results business, and we all know that it is, and that has to be a huge part of what we're looking at as well. But ensuring that they have that kind of that belief in what we're doing, and that we understand that it can be hard at times, I think is also kind of really important and really a great part of what I've seen Pete and Helen build in that area.
Yeah, I think it has been particularly tough through pandemic as well, because I think especially with sales teams, once they go remote, you know, I've worked with a couple of really big companies through lockdown, so they've got, you know, a lot of people working from home, and in the nicest possible way. You know, I think it got to a certain point in lockdown where there were salespeople who were sat in their bedrooms in their pants making sales calls and eating Watsits, and in the nicest possible way. You know, it can be a not so motivational experience. You know, you've not got that buzz around you, you've not got that team to say maybe the next call will be better. So yeah, it has been a bit of a challenge. How have you and Helen managed that during lockdown then, Pete? What's been your secret sauce to keep the team excited, engaged, and keep picking up the phone or sending the next email again while we have been in lockdown?
I mean, we haven't. The team have been crying every day. No, most days. No. So I think a few things. I think one, there's kind of some structural things. I think the whole way we set up sales teams and the whole way we pay salespeople with commission and things like that works brilliantly if you've got a replicatable process that works, and it's just about, you know, effort in, effort out type thing. And one of the problems with lockdown is all of a sudden things that used to work didn't work, and it was a different world. And in that world, what you need your team to do is try lots of different things and be okay about failing at them, and get as much data back about what works and what doesn't as quickly as possible, and then iterate, try again, blah, blah, blah. And if a bunch of their compensation comes down to whether or not you're getting people over the line, they're not motivated to do that. They just want to do something that they know works again and again and again to try and get money in their pay packet. So some of what we did was, you know, moving to a team bonus and making sure that, you know, we were all in it together, and some people could concentrate on the stuff that we thought, you know, was more likely to work, while other people were trying some other stuff, so that we weren't leaving anything on the table, or we weren't missing better ways of doing things. Some of the stuff was just being really open about it, and within and out with the sales team. So on every team meeting, we were really upfront and like, look, we're having a bad run in the sales team. We're finding it really hard. The world has changed, and you know, when you see them in the virtual corridors of Wordnerds Tower, give them a cuddle, because they probably need one, and a little bit of sympathy and empathy and understanding from other people in the organization went a long way. And just sort of just not being dicks as well. I mean, there was some other stuff about like nobody was taking holiday during COVID because like, what are you going to do? Like, oh yeah, today I'm going to take a holiday and go and spend the day in my lounge, not in my kitchen. That's brilliant. It's a brilliant use of a holiday, isn't it? So people were getting kind of burnt out, and they were working more. You know, a lot of people, we've got really conscientious team members, and so their reaction to not hitting their targets for the first time was to put more hours in, and so they're kind of getting burnt out, and they're not taking holidays. So eventually we just said, like, right, everybody in the company is taking 2 days in June, and just, you've got to take the holiday. You can't carry them forward. Just go away, get out, go for a walk, you know, yada yada yada. And you've just got to sort of try and look after people and get them to keep a sense of perspective. Get them to try different things, make it okay to fail. And actually, we were trying really hard, and we did eventually get something that worked, but largely we were riding it out. And there was an element of, we are not gonna go under in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And we still love you. We still think you're great. And whatever happens in the next few months, you're going to be okay. Let's do everything that we can, but the world will start turning again. And when that happens, we'll be in a better place. And by the way, we rebuilt all of our disco processes and all of our demo processes, and we read all the books on all of those things. And we spent all of the time re-engineering all of our processes to try and make it work. And the result, now that the world is turning, is that we are much more organized, much better off than we were previously. We've got a better system. We've got more kind of replicatable processes and all of that kind of thing. But it still wasn't much use to us during lockdown, and we were quite honest about that.
I think that approach as well shows a huge amount of both trust in and respect for your sales team as well, because I think that's the other thing. It's about respecting actually the challenge that they've sometimes got in front of them, because I think it has been a hard couple of years, and I think even businesses who maybe had a sales process which didn't involve, that face-to-face sort of lead gen that you maybe had to replicate, maybe they already had a hands-off lead gen approach. They faced a lot of the same problems, but I think to actually say with the team, look, we've got you. We want, do you want to move to this? So try new stuff. That's like an incredibly brave thing to have done. It must have been really reassuring for them, and also hugely valuable for you as an organisation. Really, is to say, coming out now with some actual data where you can say, well, we tried those 4 things and they didn't work. These 3 things we tried and they did work. So you must have got a real feel like you've got a real result out of that actually gearing you up for the future, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that understanding that it is hard. We sat down in a board meeting with our investors, and we were like, Steve and I were like, look, we're really sorry, we haven't sold anything new this month and all this kind of thing. And the board were like, hey, don't worry, like, everybody's in the same boat. And like, every company we've invested in our whole portfolio, apart from like some guys who are doing online webinars, they're flying. They're like Grinch, right? They're living their best lives. Apart from them, everybody's shit, and like everybody wants to kill themselves. And you guys are doing all the right things. And so, and we got to the point where we were saying that, like, sometimes you do all the right things, you put in all the right inputs, and you don't get the results that you deserve. And all you can do is the right things. And the board were going, the hardest bit in any organization is always the sales. It's always new business. And right now it's the hardest it's ever been. So no expectations, just kind of, and also I should say our investors were amazing. They were like, look, we've got a bunch of money ring fenced for you. We're not going to see you go under. We really believe in what you guys are doing. If you don't sell anything for the next 18 months, we'll pile this money in. We'll keep you going, because we know that when it all ends, you'll come out of it stronger. And that's when you need investors. That's when you need great investors. Every investor's great when it's all going well and it's shiny and new and it's the start of the process. It's when COVID happens, that's when you find out whether your investors are any bloody good. And I'm delighted to find out that ours are class human beings, and they couldn't have been more supportive. So I think it helped that we felt supported and were able to therefore support our staff. And I appreciate not everybody has that luxury. Not everybody's venture backed or can, has the savings to ride some of this stuff out. So it was probably a bit easier for us than it was for other people as well.
It's good if they can bring that wider experience as well, because I think all of a sudden when you think it's not just us, that's really helpful as well, because I think, there is that whole thing. There was that whole kind of like roller coaster. It's interesting what you're saying about webinars, actually, because there was definitely a time, like, the first sort of 3 or 4 months of lockdown, webinars were doing amazingly well, and then they just dropped off the end of the cliff. And it was because like literally people got 3 or 4 months in, they're just like, done with that now. Can't the idea of going to the webinar, I'd rather shoot myself. So I think the other thing was, like, during the pandemic, part of the problem was you had these like waves of things. So it wasn't even, this works, this doesn't work. It's like, this is working this month, okay, next month it's just not working anymore. And I think that it's a challenge when you're working within one organization, because you don't know if that's you. Is this just us? Yeah. Is it just what we're doing? Whereas when you've got those like wider people involved, it's really helpful, because all of a sudden you can start to, say, well, based on like what's happening in other businesses, it's exactly the same. Or actually, all their webinars are doing really well. Maybe maybe someone else should present them.
What was that social media platform that everybody went onto and then immediately left? Something House or something, or House?
Oh, Clubhouse.
Clubhouse.
What was that about? There. Everybody was on Clubhouse. It's like, what? Oh, Clubhouse. So you download it, you're on it, and there's everything. We're all on House.
Literally, I had an Android phone, so by the time everyone had left, I still couldn't even get on. So I was like, oh well, But yeah, it was like everyone's on LinkedIn, like, yeah, come to Clubhouse. Like, oh, no idea. But yeah, if that was your entire sales strategy, then that was going to be a problem as well. Yeah. Guys, I'm really conscious we've massively run over time. I'm so sorry. It's just been so nice talking to you. Actually, it's been super interesting. So what do you see? That was a wash-up question. The question I always ask everyone is like, so from all of your learning experience, what would be your 3 top tips if you're out there selling software, selling SaaS like today, from everything that you've learned?
I'll do one and then you do one and then.
Okay. And we'll fight over.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're in a SaaS company, you're in a VC-backed SaaS company, or really any kind of SaaS company, you are going to have to scale to some extent at some point. So previously, as I said, I was a freelancer, and being a freelancer, you learn the way that you sell and you use what you have personally, but that's not what SaaS sales is like, because you will have to teach other people how to do it. You will have to trust them to go out and sell as well as you, even though they are different people with wildly different heights to you. They're going to have to learn how to do this. So I think if I was starting again in this, I would be annotating every sales call I did, thinking about what works, what doesn't, thinking about what people responded to, and trying to write that down as early as possible, so that you have that kind of, and build on it and keep changing it, keep trying new things, but have that so that the next person that comes in to do this isn't starting from square one and isn't flying by the seat of their personality. They're trying to, so I think we've got really quite kind of across the whole business, we've got very into playbooks and coaching and recording. I think the sooner you do that, or the sooner you get into the habit of what worked about that, let's write it down. I think that is going to be the thing that will allow you to scale. That's one.
It's a good one.
That's a brilliant one.
Good one. So I think my one would be the sales conversation pivots around that discovery meeting. It's all about the disco for us. The most important conversation you have is usually right near the start, and it's that what is the problem? How big a problem is it? How motivated are you to solve it? What's your technical pain? What's your business pain? What's your personal pain? And how much of a priority is it for you? And it took us ages to work that out. We did the whole thing of early on. We were really excited. You probably haven't noticed this, but Steve and I get quite excitable. And we got really excited about that. We built this really fucking cool thing, right? Like, honestly, it's dead good. There's a bit in our demo where we do this thing, we type something in, and the AI brings back loads of things that isn't that, but means the same thing, even though the language is completely different. And it just looks like magic. Everybody goes, it's everybody says you need an R moment in your, or an ooh moment in your demo. That's our like ooh moment, and people go like, holy fucking shit, that's great. You know what I mean? And so we were just trying to get people to that as quickly as possible. And it was like, hi, I'm Pete, I'll show you my software. And like, just sort of, and actually it took us ages to realize it's not about that at all. And that first disco meeting, it's really clever people that we really admire finally sat us in a room and sat us down and said, stop selling your shit, start listening, start finding out about their problem, and spend ages just talking about how much of a problem is this, what would it mean if you solved that problem, what does that look like to you, what, who else would benefit, what would you do with that time that you had back, blah 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 blah. Really explore that, and if you really explore that, it helps you work out who you're wasting your time on and who you're not. And if we put together the all of the hours that we spent demoing to people who were never going to buy, chasing people who we couldn't get a decision out of because we didn't get that qualification piece right, because we didn't nail that pain, we would have enough time consecutively to spend all that time that Steve spent in the library when he was a teenager, while the rest of us were out there drinking, taking drugs, and chasing other people of the opposite sex, and actually learning something useful and being as clever as him.
That's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time.
I'm not sure I've come out very well from this call, to be honest. Gigantic gangly virgin, I think, is.
It's not true. It's not even that big.
I'm 5'6". All part of the.
It's just part of the mythology, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I'm not even Scottish, Victoria. I'm from Basingstoke. So we've got one more, and I'm torn between two things that Pete said, which is kind of nice because it's both of ours. But I think what you'll notice that Pete has said multiple times in this call is we spoke to this person and they taught us this, and we spoke to this person and they told us why we were being stupid in this direction. We're incredibly lucky with our funders, who are all have experience in SaaS, the likes of which you couldn't have by yourself. They've got and also really different. So we have some people who some of our investors are really kind of gung ho and really kind of go for it, and some are like whoa, take it. I think that kind of diversity of thought and tolerance for risk and that kind of thing are also really useful. But we have worked really hard because I think one of the things that Pete says a lot is lessons from Daykin and Story, his previous agency, number 147,000. And one of the first ones he said there was, I didn't ask for advice regularly enough, and that's definitely something that we know that we don't have all the SaaS answers. So we do a variety of different kind of SaaS business training. We do, we talk to our founders, we talk to other people in the community. So, and people are generally really generous with their time and expertise. So reach out to people, and of course, subscribe to Buzztastic.
Nice.
I mean, don't say that. People subscribe, and then it means I've got to send them an email. That's like really hard work, But I think it is quite interesting though, because obviously here in the Northeast, I think we've got like a really strong community, and I think that one of the things that I've really noticed on going into different parts of the country, in talking to people about the support that they've got. There really is quite a lot of support in the Northeast. There's a lot of local agencies, but there's a lot of expertise, and there's a lot of other, software companies, a lot of other SaaS companies. There's lots of other people that you can talk to, and we're really fortunate to be in the kind of environment where people are really cool with that as well. So I do think that that's a bit of a USP of where we are, as well as being able to reach wider than that, because the internet. But I think it just goes to show it's great to have that kind of support around you, isn't it?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But I also think it's not just restricted to the Northeast. I think we were, we've been really fortunate to be welcomed into the Tech Nation umbrella and work with some amazing startups all over the country, from the South Coast to Cambridge in the East, and obviously a lot of people who are London wankers as well. And they're all lush, and like they're all really generous with their time. And we've all lent on people who are further down the journey than we are, and we've all spoken to other founders and said, look, I've got a problem with this, what do I do? And even just that process of talking through whether or not they've got the answer. And often people will come to us and go, I've got this problem. You go, tell me about the problem. 10 minutes later, they've solved their own problem. And they're like, you're amazing. It's like, yeah, you're welcome. And we've done literally nothing other than being there and listened to them. But people are really generous with their time. And I was funny enough, I was talking to another founder yesterday who's in Winchester, and he's he had loads of people signed up to the demos. He's just started off, and he had a bunch of people kind of doing some stuff, and he was thinking he was going to get his first few sales, and he did a kind of demo, and then they haven't adopted the platform. They've done the sort of training, but they haven't kind of picked it up, and he was really kind of down. And I was like, look, this is hard. Like, look at the stats. Everybody goes, 95% of SaaS companies fail in their first year, and the 95% of the rest of them fail in the next year. And then, this is like Squid Game. You're kind of, if you survive, if you're on episode 4, you're doing amazing, right? And this is just the way it is. SaaS is really, really competitive. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
People don't like spending money, and nobody needs more software. Everybody's got like quite enough software. Thank you very much. So you've got to be really bloody good in solving a massive problem, and it's tough. And people who are doing it have found it tough and have asked loads of other people for their advice and got it and learned a load. And they're always really happy to help you. And if you're as cheeky as Steve and I, we're not proud, and we'll ask anybody about stuff. And a lot of the best advice we've had are from other founders who have given it to us completely for free and then helped us implement it often. So we're really fortunate and really grateful to those people for all of that help. 100%.
That's a really nice way to wrap up this interview, saying thank you for all the love that you've received and your success. That makes you feel warm inside, Bring the dog back. Oh, look, guys, it's been so fantastic to catch up with you. We're obviously going to drop all your links in underneath so people can get in touch with you. But thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And next time we'll have the conversation about AI over beer, eh?
Oh, let's do that. Thanks for having us. It's been a load of fun as ever. And you're one of the people that helped us right at the start, Victoria. So 100%. We really appreciate that.
Oh, well, that's really kind of you to say. I really appreciate it. It's always nice as well. It's always nice to, meet people and be part of what they go on to do as well. So what's not to like?